You're listening to the Full and Thriving podcast, a place where courageous women come to break free from food obsession, heal their relationship with their body, and strive to live a life that's present, lighthearted, and meaningful. If you're listening, my wish is that this podcast serves as a catalyst that inspires you to nourish your body, nurture your mind, and energize your spirit. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, a certified life coach and eating disorder recovery coach with a PhD in having a good time. Just kidding about that last part. Anyway, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show. Today's guest is Cassie Barnard. Cassie is a London-based registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, passionate about health, nutrition, and living a full life. She combines her unique education and training in nutrition, mindfulness, and behavior change to help clients effectively implement powerful and practical tools to heal their relationship with food. In this episode, Cassie and I discuss emotional overeating and binge eating, the difference between them, and how to dig deep and unpack the toxic diet culture beliefs related to food and body one might have that perpetuate these behaviors so that they can eventually heal their relationship with food. I know that you're going to adore this episode with the lovely Cassie. Enjoy! Hi, Cassie. How are you today?
Hi, Meg. Really good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. It is a true pleasure to have you here today. I know before you got on the call that you mentioned it's actually sunny in London today. So I'm curious, on a sunny London day, what do you do?
Oh my gosh, get outside as much as possible. Yeah, you're so right. These days are very, very few and far between. I've been in London now for 6 years now. And I've come to learn that when the sun is shining, get outside. So it's actually not that warm, but the sun is shining. There are gorgeous blue skies, and there's people out there in their bathing suits on the grass. That's how desperate we are in London. We need some sunshine. It's been a long winter.
I love that. You know, I'm from an area in the US, the Northeast. It gets a little cold and cloudy here a lot of the time too. So I'm right there with you. Like, if it's sunny, I will make it outside. Even on a cold, sunny day, you got to find a way to get that vitamin D, you know?
Totally agree. Totally agree. Yes, I know it's so nice. And I find it really shifts my mood. And so, yeah, I just really make the most of it. Take lots of little breaks, get my sun in the skin, and feeling nice today. Feeling nice.
Good. I'm so glad. I can feel the sunshine just through the screen right now. I don't know. You just seem really happy and positive about the day. So that's so great. So I'm excited to talk to you about everything with emotional overeating and binge eating today. But before we dive into that, I would love to hear about your background and your journey to becoming an intuitive eating dietitian.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think you can tell from my accent that I am Australian, so hence the love of sunshine. So that's where it all started. I've done all of my studies and all of my training in Australia. I'm from the West Coast in a small little town. I mean, it's not really that small. It is a capital city, but very small compared to the rest of the world, called Perth. And I did my training there in nutrition and dietetics. I graduated nearly 7 years ago now, and I was, like most dietitians, eager and excited and just so keen to help people and put all of these years of training into practice. And so I get my first few jobs in hospitals, do some clinical rotations, and really up-level my clinical skills before then moving to London in 2017. And it was in 2017 where I landed my first job in a private weight loss clinic here in central London. And I thought, very young, very naive, that, oh my goodness, I'm going to be helping people. This is going to be incredible. I'm finally putting all of my training and all of my skills into practice. And when I think about it, and this is what I say to my clients all the time, and I really try and practice what I preach, that at the time I didn't know any better. And this is the training that I received. And my intention was only for the best, right? And so after a few years here and recognizing that clients were coming to me with what they described to be weight problems or body problems. But as we kind of peeled those layers back and got really deep underneath the surface of the root of these behaviors, we began to uncover that it wasn't so much about the body per se and the weight loss per se. It was about how they felt about themselves and their level of self-acceptance and their level of self-esteem. And I started to really learn and work very closely with my clients in this one-to-one counseling sessions, that as we started to get to know each other and really understand their childhood experiences and their experiences living in diet culture and a lot of the trauma that they've experienced as a result of all of these factors, that we were treating the wrong thing per se. And so, kind of long story short, my passion and my strong desire to help people drastically shifted towards helping people feel amazing in their own skin, because they were coming in wanting to lose weight and wanting to change their body. And some of my clients, sure, they would lose weight, but they wouldn't feel any better and they wouldn't feel any better about themselves. And as we started to really kind of uncover and peel and learn more about their experiences, I was thinking, well, there's something missing here and that there has to be more to this. And after a few years in this clinic, I just couldn't work there for obvious reasons. It was deeply misaligned with what I believed, and it felt very unethical and just not aligned with how I wanted to take my practice as a dietitian. And so I ended up leaving that, and I ended up working within the mental health and eating disorder space as a clinical dietitian, and there worked in hospital and supported patients with different mental health illnesses as well as eating disorders through their recovery. And then alongside that, I also founded a clinic in London called Body Health London. And we specialized in body image and intuitive eating and helping people overcome chronic dieting and eating disorders. And so I guess that's like, a very kind of short version of a very long story, but quite interesting because as a student and as a, I guess, human living in this space, I never really planned to specialize in disordered eating and eating disorders and intuitive eating. It kind of just happened. And it happens because once you see how problematic diet culture is and the impact it has on our lives, you can't unsee that. And so I felt like compelled to do this work. And the rest is kind of history.
Wow. I love that story. It's such a journey. I'm sure you're like this fresh, newly employed individual, just moved to London to be a dietitian. And you're like hearing all of these emotional stories about like body image problems and self-acceptance and low self-esteem. And you're like, I don't sign up for this. This is wild. Like, I feel like I'm doing something completely different than just helping people with their weight loss goals. So that must have been an interesting shift. Do you remember any moments where you started to realize like, wow, this is just like not aligned with my goals? Or like you said, you just can't unsee it. Like, what do you remember from that experience that made you shift away from the weight loss support that you were doing?
For sure. And honestly, it happened quite early on. And I was in that clinic for 2 years, but honestly, in the first couple of weeks, the first couple of months, I was like, wow, something's not quite working here because it's not aligned. And I mean, by the end of the day, I was young and was new to London. I needed to work. And so I was figuring it out slowly and, gathering more evidence and getting more training. And what I did behind closed doors eventually did begin to shift. But I guess the biggest takeaway from my work there and what I realizing wasn't working is that when the clients did get quote unquote the weight loss that they wanted, they weren't any happier. It didn't result in more fulfillment and more joy and more pleasure. It resulted in, well, now I want more weight loss. And it was getting to this place of never really being enough. And so I had this aha moment. It wasn't like a one day I woke up out of bed and like, this is it. But gradually over time and just through that experience, I was thinking, wow, it's not really ever been about the weight loss. It's about all of the programming and the brainwashing that we have received since we were children, that what you look like says anything about your worth. That's the problem here. And that was where I felt kind of a bit gross and a bit icky working in that space.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a deeper issue, right? It's like it turned into a conversation about worth and like being able to find that probably within yourself and not through external measures.
Exactly right. Exactly. And you're right. I did not quote unquote sign up for this as a dietitian because it's not how we're trained, but yet it is the work that I was just so drawn to. Well, you kind of have no choice in a way, because to do this work, to
Yeah.
be in the intuitive eating world and to work with individuals with eating disorders and a history of chronic dieting, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the uncoupling and the deprogramming and the unblending that they have received from children from the age of, 5, 6, 7 years old, maybe in their teenage years, where their worth or what they ate says anything about them as a human. And, if you look like this, then you will belong. Or if you eat like this, then you will be popular. And all those trashy magazines that we read as kids as well, all of this information has been feeding our brain and then resulted in this really chaotic, disordered outlook towards food and body, where we're missing the root of it all, which is, are we actually good people, and who are we on the inside, and who are we when it comes to our hearts and our soul, as opposed to that kind of physical outer shell.
And it sounds like even though it wasn't what you signed up for, it's so much more fulfilling and vast and like expansive for you now that you're in this like version of being a dietitian where you do consider the person as a whole human with their own human experiences, and that unblending those toxic beliefs about diet culture and body image and all that.
100%. 100%. I love this work so much now. And it's so meaningful. And I am so grateful for the journey that I've been on and the experiences that I've had, because I wouldn't be where I am today without it. So it's all added up to where we are. And there's still so much to learn. I mean, I'm still very, very young in my career still. There's still a whole lot of life to be lived. But where I am right now, I'm very excited, and I feel very, very content with the work I do with clients. It feels like I can go to bed at night and I sleep well. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Not everyone can say that. So that's a big deal. And yes, you do have so much more life to live, which is amazing. So let's dive into it. Could you, share a little bit or explain what exactly emotional overeating is, and then maybe how it's different from binge eating?
So when we think about what the purpose of emotional overeating is, it's often serving a positive intention. It's bringing something positive in the immediate future or in the kind of present moment. Now, what can have then the negative impact on that behavior is we're not really addressing the root cause of what's really going on beneath the surface. These behaviors around food are a symptom for something bigger and greater, and it's often not really about the food. I mean, we could substitute eating in there for shopping or for compulsive hand washing. It's just the way in which the brain has learned how to cope, and therefore has overcoupled these emotions with this behavior being food, or these emotions and I go shopping, or these emotions and I go and wash my hands, right? It's just in this situation, the brain has now overcoupled eating with these emotions, and it happens on autopilot. It's not something that we are consciously aware of, because often in these cases with my clients, it's been going on for years and sometimes decades. And so if we're not getting to the root of why these problems or why these emotions are here in the first place, the food might not be, and in most cases it isn't, meeting that emotional need. And so you want to really peel back those layers. And the consequences in not doing so is it causes more distress and more disorder on the body, because we're not really getting to the root of what's actually going on. And second to that, a lot of people find emotional eating in the long term very distressing. It increases their anxiety around food, their fear around food. They feel more self-conscious. They are more likely to eat in secret or hide what they're eating from their partner or their friends. They may start to decline social occasions or get very stressed if food will be there. And they become very self-conscious and feel like their world revolving around food because it takes up all of their brain space. And so it really limits their quality of life and the amount of pleasure that they can seek, because it takes up so much of that mental real estate.
Wow. Yeah. Such a good distinction there is like, yes, like sometimes it's good to eat from an emotional place, but then there is a need to address that root issue, which is, whatever is that underlying reason for coupling emotion with food, right? And then being able to dive deeper and explore that so that you don't have maybe consequences like more emotional or mental distress around food in the long term. That's really interesting. I'm really curious. So when it comes to emotional overeating, there's also the thought of binge eating. And I'd love it if you could share kind of what that difference is. I know you said emotional overeating is more of a behavior. What is binge eating and how can people start to discern the difference for them?
Again, such a good question. And I think it's helpful to have an understanding and awareness of your behaviors, but I wouldn't worry too much about defining what is going on, right? At the end of the day, if it's causing distress, it warrants support, right? But we think about emotional overeating, it does kind of get thrown around. And so does binge eating and so does overeating, right? So the only clinical term we have here is binge eating disorder, whereas overeating and emotional overeating or emotional eating in general are very subjective behavioral terms that we can't define clinically. Binge eating disorder is an eating disorder, and it's defined by eating a large amount of food in a short amount of time with a complete loss of control. And it happens frequently. So it happens at least 3 times a week. And it can happen a lot more based on the severity of that person's eating disorder, right? So we're looking more at the behavior with food, and binge eating can occur whether the emotion is present or not. So there are different root causes that can drive binge eating, right? So sometimes it can be caused by restriction, but in most cases it isn't. It's caused by either an emotion. It may be caused by different states in a woman's menstrual cycle, for example, can making one more vulnerable. It can be triggered by alcohol or substance use, right? So having alcohol the day before can then trigger a binge the next day. It can be a behavioral response to trauma. And so it really, really depends on each individual and what their unique situation is. But at the end of the day, it is that loss of control, but it is eating a significant amount of food in a short space of time.
I think that's helpful to remind everyone. I get the question all the time from folks with anorexia. Was that a binge? Was that a binge? Because it's really a feeling of being out of control, but the quantity isn't necessarily there.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And especially if that's your history of coming from a restrictive eating disorder, the perception of what a normal portion of food can be a bit warped in terms of what normal portions are. And you have high energy requirements in recovery, and there may be periods of extreme hunger, which is really important to honor to meet your body's needs.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like it's such a helpful reminder for some folks listening who might be confused about what they're doing with food, right? So thank you for that. As far as emotional overeating goes, I'm wondering how common is this and what are some of the common triggers that can lead to it? I know you mentioned actually emotional triggers, but I'm just curious about how common this is for folks, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, again, it's not a clinical diagnosis, right? And it gets thrown around very, very loosely in terms of a behavior that people struggle with. And it's also very subjective. So there's no way in which to define emotional overeating. But just to kind of go back a few steps here, if we can, we're thinking about emotional eating as a concept, again, gets a bad rap in the media. If you're eating for emotional reasons, that's bad. And that's not true at all. Food is meant to be emotional. We have had an emotional association with food since we were children. When a baby is fed, they are held while they are given the bottle or the breast. And so from being a baby, we make the association that food equals safety and comfort and a sense of being soothed, right? So we're making these associations. And then throughout life, we have experiences of having birthday cake at birthday parties or a cake at a wedding. So food's very much about celebration, or it's about culture. It's about nostalgia and thinking about grandma's cooking like having a roast lamb when you were a child, right? Bringing up fond memories. And so food does have an emotional component. It always has and it always will. And it's really important that when you feel like you're eating for emotional reasons and you're feeling like, oh, I'm feeling a bit down, I'm feeling a bit sad, or I'm feeling a bit happy, or whatever the emotion might be, is that you give yourself the permission to let the food soothe you. Because food is meant to be soothing. Food is a wonderful way to cope. But where folks can go wrong is by not giving themselves the permission to allow the food to do what it's meant to do, which is soothe. And it's perfectly okay. It's one of the wonderful tools we have in our toolbox as a way to soothe and meet our needs. So I want just to name that. Eating for emotions is very normal. Eating when you're not hungry is also very normal. Eating if something just sounds nice, or you walk past a bakery and it reminds you of your grandma, it's an amazing reason to eat. We don't just eat when we're hungry and stop when we're full. We have a really complex, unique, really wonderful relationship with food, and we can eat for a variety of reasons. So that's a really important concept to grasp as you're on this healing journey and really making peace with food.
Okay. So just to piggyback on that, emotional overeating isn't necessarily a behavior that needs to be stopped. It's a behavior you want to give yourself permission to do when you have the awareness around it, right? So I assume it's more about building awareness of when it's occurring, giving yourself permission to do that, but also recognizing that it's not solving the root issue of maybe why you're turning to food when you feel certain emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just not so black and white, really, because we think about when we're thinking about that relationship with food, we all have such a unique story and such a unique history. But when we think about when it becomes a problem, it's often because we might not be getting a need met. And when there is distress in our life, so there's too much going on, there's too much overwhelm, too much pressure, too much stress, and there's not enough of meeting our basic needs, not enough love, not enough play, not enough care, our system, so our body begins to suffer. And we might be walking around in this survival state. And when we're in this survival state, we then don't get accurate signals of hunger and fullness. We are going to have a sense of confusion on how to do things because we're not getting enough accurate information from our brain to our body. And then we live the whole day that way. And then come the evening, we go, oh, well, I feel bad inside. I feel yucky inside. And so we turn to external feedback and external things, grabbing things outside of us to fix it because we feel so yucky inside of the body. Whereas what we want to be doing instead is asking our body what feels like too much inside, what feels like too much in here or too much in my close proximity, and what's making me respond in this way. And so, yes, it is getting really curious with it. And so what I was describing previously around that emotional relationship with food is, yes, food should be emotional and we do need to have that permission around it. Absolutely. Like at the end of the day, we want to be eating for other reasons than just physical reasons, for sure. But when we're learning this and we're in the kind of ebb and flow of getting to know our body and how we could name these sensations in our body. Does it feel like buzzy or blah? Does it feel revved up? Like if we were to describe these sensations that we're experiencing, does that match our response to food? When we're feeling revved up and buzzy, do we then turn to food to soothe and to cope because it's all feeling like too much? Or when we're feeling blah and numb and meh, do we then turn to food as a way to feel something? Right. And so it's getting really clever at not looking at, yes, the behavior for sure, because that's the symptom of something deeper, but turning to the body as a resource and thinking, well, what's going on? Because something's feeling like too much or not enough.
Interesting. So a lot about it is like thinking about your needs and what needs need to be met.
Exactly
very
right.
good. Very good. So good. So when it comes to these root causes, how can someone start to identify the root cause underneath their emotional eating?
Oh, Meg, good question. Good
Thank
question. Again, it's super subjective and very, very individual, but it does come back to what I just named previously around turning to your body as a resource. And because in our culture, we have been taught that if things are feeling like too much or not enough, we go to external feedback. Oh, you don't like something or something's feeling like too much? Here, go on a diet. Because this diet promises you no pain and no trauma and no grief. And then when you go on this diet, everyone will like you and you will belong and you will have confidence. And you can follow and pour your heart and your soul into all of these recommendations from celebrities and influencers and pour your heart and soul into that. And it's a great distractor from all of these painful thoughts and feelings and emotions, right? It's the perfect solution to all of our dilemmas. And so in our culture, we have been taught to go on a diet to solve X, Y, and Z problem. But what the diet hasn't come with, or this kind of let's slap a food plan on it or follow this program to fix the problem, it doesn't come with this biological disclaimer that if we go on diets and we go on plans and programs and rely on external feedback for reference, that it wires our brain to believe that we don't get our needs met. And it's that wiring of I don't get my needs met that then lands us in the place of emotional overeating.
Wow. Okay. So I find these external things like these plans, these diet plans, they make us detach from the body, right? So it's like being connected to that root cause is almost impossible. Those diets actually teach us to completely ignore the body, which, like, whether it needs something or not, right? It's like we don't know anymore because we're just doing this diet. So how does someone start to root back into the body so they can discover their needs and discover what's going on inside?
Yeah. So we kind of need to do a couple of things. Now, the body has got to trust, and I say this with so much love and so much care, but your body has got to trust that you are a competent adult who is going to feed it.
Can I just say, I'm so glad you said that. 'Cause that's something I've always said to clients, something I've said, when I was going through my recovery, I had that realization, your body needs to trust that it's going to be fed. I think you're the only other person who said it to me exactly like that. So I love it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no way around it, right? Because if your body does not trust you that you're going to feed it, you're going to be in survival mode, and it's going to send you some wacky signals to make sure you do get your needs met. So we have to make sure you are fed enough, and we have to dismantle any of the beliefs that are still associated and attached to diet culture, where you believe that your worth or your value or your character says anything about what you look like. Now, in terms of what you can actually do, yes, it does start with making sure you are fed enough. I mean, there's no way around this. And look, the permission to eat and the permission to do that for all of my clients, it feels really scary. And it does because of the culture that we live in. Hence why, alongside making sure we're meeting your needs, we're working on dismantling any beliefs that are no longer serving you or no longer relevant to you. Because a lot of us walk around with these beliefs that we have been carrying for 5 years, 10 years, maybe decades and decades of our life that aren't relevant to us based on what other people told us. So, for example, I was speaking with a client recently, and what we started to uncover is that she had this belief that she can't live her life fully and she will never feel beautiful until she loses weight or until she gets one dress size less than what she currently is. And as we started to really unpack that and really dismantle that, we kind of helping her to unblend and detach and uncouple from this belief of, well, is that your belief, or where did that belief actually come from? Who told you that belief? Because it doesn't sound like your belief, because I know you're sitting here with me right now. So how old is this belief? Is this from your eating disorder? Is this from your childhood? Is this from your parents? Is this from a trashy magazine you read when you were 14 years old? Whose voice is it that we are listening to? Because I know you, and what you've just said doesn't align with your core values. And so there's this misalignment going on here. We have all these beliefs around food and body, but actually they aren't our beliefs. They have been instilled in us. And so if we work on dismantling that and really understanding what those core values are and what it is that we do truly believe, we can then start to feel more safe inside.
Very good. Yes, I love recognizing that there's that misalignment and just connecting with the core values to direct you back to yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. And it's really looking at, what someone can do is looking at the function as to why their pattern or their behaviors with food exist. And we want to understand that so that we can give your kind of adult self here, the one that's feeding you and dismantling diet culture, we can give your adult self some solutions and some strategies to implement today. And so, like what we're really doing here is we're kind of unpacking and uninstalling before we repack and reinstall.
I like that idea, that visual of uninstalling and reinstalling. That's funny.
Yeah.
That's so true. It is looking at the function as well. What are some functions that are like typical or common that you've seen in your practice?
The most common function, which is quite interesting, comes down to protection, which is quite interesting. Hence, I said before around the emotional eating serving a really positive intention. I'll make this up, but let's say at 12 years old, you never got recognition unless you got A grades at school, or you didn't get the recognition unless you were winning all of the games in your sporting team, right? And so if we're not getting the recognition and the unconditional love that every human deserves, especially as children, this protecting part of this kind of protector within us starts to take over and starts to kind of live our life and rule our life and starts to engage in behaviors through the lens of self-protection. Because at 12 years old, at 14 years old, you have always been lovable, you always will be lovable. And at that age, you got let down because people around you, and this is not to blame or shame anyone, but people around you and your caregivers and your support network didn't instill the idea within you that you are good enough exactly as you are. You are lovable exactly as you are, whether you get A grades or not. And so if that's not the message that you receive as a young person, this inner protector starts to kind of white knuckle it and then turns to different coping strategies. And in this case, it's food as a way to cope, as a form of self-protection. And so when we start to recognize and break this down with clients, we can see, okay, we're peeling back the layers here that this part of you got installed when you were 12 years old, when you were young and vulnerable, before your prefrontal cortex was fully formed. And we're looking at your life now through your child brain. And it makes perfect sense. Now, is this part of you still relevant? Is it still serving that purpose? What can we do to look after that part of you, to support that part of you? How can your adult self make sure you are meeting your needs?
I love it. So that 12-year-old or 14-year-old, whoever the example was, who didn't have their needs met, like as an adult, how would you guide them to discovering those needs?
Again, depends what's going on and who the person might be. But what comes first is actually more of a grieving process. And recognizing that at whatever age, let's just say it's 12, just for this example, but recognizing that at 12 years old, you got let down. Who didn't protect you at 12 years old? Again, not to blame or shame, but as a 12-year-old, you can't look after yourself. You need your caregivers. You need people around you. You rely on others to have your needs met. And if that is then overcoupled with dieting, or a mother who diets, or a family who's very weight and body obsessed, the message that we receive is, oh, cool, you don't like your body? That's great, go on a diet. It's like, no, this is third and fourth generation Western culture garbage. No kids are supposed to be dieting. We're meant to be eating and growing and thriving and living our life. And this brainwashing that is now 3 or 4 generations deep is really now thinking that the solution to our low self-esteem and self-hatred and body image problems and self-rejection and fear of rejection is to fix our body. And it's recognizing that, this is pretty damn messed up, that the society that we live in. And because of all of this trauma that you've experienced, we need to work through this grieving process and recognize that you got let down and it's not fair. And so that's really the first place that I would be starting with people, is just the naming and the unpacking. And this is the unpacking part, the unpacking of, whoa, okay, this is all pretty messed up. And this diet or whatever it might have been promised me all of these bright and shiny things, but actually I don't have any of that. And so maybe that's never been the problem in the first place.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a very long process of lots of unpacking and reinstalling, like you said. And the grieving is definitely the place to start. It's really that recognizing that those beliefs you held so tightly are no longer serving you. And now it's time to revise those.
Yeah, for sure. And with that as well, it's like your brain, we need to get your brain to calm down with some consistent nourishment as well. That comes back to we need to feed you adequately. And at the same time, understanding what these beliefs are and what really are your beliefs and what's no longer aligned with who you are in the present moment.
Yes. Okay. So a lot of it's coming back to who you are, if these beliefs are matched with the old version of you or not. And becoming that person who believes those new beliefs and acts in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
And what I often ask my clients is, do you want to be a person who is constantly white knuckling it for the rest of your life? No, thank you.
No, I do not. Please teach me. I would not want that at all. Well, Cassie, this has been absolutely lovely. And before I let you go, I was wondering if you have any final advice for someone who is struggling with emotional overeating and wants to start making positive changes in their life.
Yes. Final advice. I feel like we've touched on so much. This is like a therapy session, a little food and body therapy session, Meg.
That's so good. It's related. It's all related.
For sure. One thing I will say is that the experiences you're having with food is not bad. What is really helpful is taking this zoom out approach and having some space and time to reflect on your experiences with food and when this all started. We don't have body image issues and problems with food for fun. We want to belong.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really a cultural thing. And sorry, that wasn't meant to be funny, but
I laughed because I'm like, that's a good statement though. We're not doing this for fun. You're definitely not taking on all these eating disorder issues and body image issues for fun. I know I laugh, but I mean, it is simply put, there's something else there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And if there's something with food that's feeling a bit chaotic or a bit disordered or something's not feeling quite right, what that tells me is that you're someone who might be carrying around some pain, and we may be using the food as a way to avoid the pain or move towards pleasure and admiration from others. And so, number one, you are so worthy of support. And if it's causing distress in your life, it is so worth reaching out for help. So I highly recommend finding a professional that you like and that you vibe with and that you trust. That's really important. And second to that, it is fully possible for every single person to heal from this emotional overeating. And give yourself the love and the grace and the patience and the space to grieve, because that's all a part of the process, knowing and believing that it is your birthright to have an easy and peaceful and beautiful relationship with food.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wow, Cassie. Well, this has been absolutely lovely. I'm so grateful to have you on the show. I know the listeners have gotten so much from this episode already, even though it hasn't even been published yet. I know that they're going to love it. So, Cassie, how can listeners work with you if they are in need of an intuitive eating dietitian?
Yeah, of course. Well, a couple of things going on right now. So come over to my website or to my Instagram. I do have a very short waiting list at the moment, but I'm looking to support more people in the next few months. So whenever this episode comes out, so you can find me. My Instagram is Cassie_Barnard_dietitian. Same on TikTok. And then my website is cassiebarnard.com, and everything I offer is there. But one thing I would say actually is, just with all of that, I do have a short wait list, but what you can do is I do have a free emotional eating workbook. So if this has landed with you today and you want some practical strategies and things to work through, definitely come and download that. It's on my website, and then you'll get access to some places you can start to heal.
Fabulous. Well, we will put the link to that in the show notes along with your website and everything. So everybody listening, go on over to the show notes, check all of that out. Cassie, you have been a great guest today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Meg. It was a joy. See you soon.
See ya. All right, that concludes this week's episode of the Full and Thriving podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. When you have a moment, please head on over to Instagram and follow my recovery coaching account at Meg_McCabe to stay up to date on everything I'm doing in recovery land. And if you're feeling extra inspired, please send me a direct message to let me know how this podcast has impacted your life. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.